Well, 2020 kind of sucked, didn't it? Um, but I've been sitting here thinking about how do we make a difference in 2021? Because the circumstances might not be a whole lot better than they were in 2020. I really hope they are, but I was thinking through how can we make this even better? How can we leverage what we do have control over to make the best of what we don't have control over? And so I decided to talk through, instead of doing a coding video today, I figured I'd talk about how do you make 2021 count? So I'm laying out three different pieces of this video. And the first one is we're going to talk about how to set up a learning path, how to go from point A to point B, so that when the end of 2021 rolls around, you might say, you know what, that year sucked, but I went a long way. And I'm a lot better off than I was in 2020. So that's the first part. And then we're going to talk about two specific areas that I think will be helpful. First of all, the four important topics to know this year, and then the four topics to be cautious of this year. And we'll talk through exactly what I mean by cautious of, but I think that doing these things will help you be in a better place next year. So let's start off with a path. Everyone asked me for a path. Can you give me a path? And I have to an extent. There's a video down in the description. There's a link to the path video that I created. It's my first pass attempt at helping you get a path to learn C#. But really a path is going to be an individual thing, because I don't know what you do know and what you don't know. And so it's going to be partly on you. Now, you need a guide. And that's what I strive to do in everything I teach. And I strive to be your guide, to help you out and to kind of point you in the right direction. But there's going to be some decision making on your part too. So let's talk about how do you set up a path at all. Okay. And the first step is going to be point yourself in the right direction. Where do you want to be? This is one that people often forget about. It sounds silly, but if you don't know your destination, how are you going to get there? And just by saying, well, I know I want to be a developer, and so I'm going to learn development stuff. That's not very specific. It's not very pointed. And that means you're going to just drive all over hoping to get to your end destination. It's not very efficient. So pick your end goal, and it doesn't have to be the rest of your life, your whole career, everything. Just pick a goal that is, let's just say you want to become a C# developer. So learn the core of C#. That's going to be your goal, is to learn C#. Your path is going to be to learn the core pieces of C#. Maybe you say, you know what, I know C# kind of well. I want to be a C# web developer. So therefore, you say, okay, that's the end goal is to know how to be a web developer. Does it not mean you're locking yourself into being a web developer for the rest of your life? This means that's the goal. And once you hit that goal, you might say, okay, now my goal is going to be a service developer or a microservice developer, or doesn't matter. One goal at a time, focus on it. So be specific in your goal. Don't just be generic and say, I want to learn all about web development. That means JavaScript, Angular, React, Vue, HTML, CSS, C#, ASP.NET Core. Way too much stuff. Focus on one thing. Focus on getting to that next big topic. Okay. So that's the first thing is know what your end goal is for this period of time, whether it's this year, whether it's the next 3 months, the next 6 months, whatever it is, pick that goal. And then identify the steps that's going to take to get there. And this is where a guide helps, because a guide will help you say, well, you know what? That's not important to learn right now. Or maybe you need to reorder these things. Or maybe that's just a more important topic to learn later on, but not right now. So a guide really helps with that, but identify the steps to take. This is why in that path video that I linked down below, I talk about the free path and the paid path. And what I do is I talk through, I have the Foundation C# series. And I highly encourage you, if you want to learn C#, whether it's web development, desktop development, service development, microservice development, back end, front end, it doesn't matter. I encourage you to start there. And that's a series of 10 courses that I go through step by step and have that guided path from start to junior level developer, or maybe even mid-level, depending on how you practice. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But that path right there is that guided tour. But I say, you know what? You don't have to pay for anything. And that's why I encourage you, don't feel like you have to pay for something. You can spend your time or your money. And if you want to spend your time, what you do is you take the path that I created, that guided path in the Foundation C# series, and you just take the topics and say, okay, I don't want to pay for this, but I can take that lesson topic and go, okay, what does Tim have on the YouTube channel? I won't have everything, but docs.microsoft.com probably has the rest. And you can piece together and learn all those different things without having to pay for it, but you have that guide, those steps to take in the order, because that order is important, okay? So identify a step to take and put them in a list and say, okay, this is the next thing I'm gonna learn, and then this, and then this. And I've talked about this before, but it's important to know what your next step is so you stay on task, so you stay focused. And so you order that list and you set it up in such a way that things build on each other. And again, that's where a guide really helps. If you build on each other, then it's going to be easier and you're going to learn it faster, and you're not going to get distracted as easily. So that's step 2. Step 1 is point in the right direction. If you're not pointing in the right direction, you're not going to hit your target. And step 2 is to identify those steps to take. Make sure you know what your steps are and what order it is. And then number 3, and this is the one that I can't say it enough. I'm going to keep saying it. You're probably tired of hearing it, and that's okay. Practice. You have not learned a topic. I'm going to be pretty bold in this statement. You have not learned a topic by watching one of my videos. It doesn't matter how clear I am. You haven't learned it until you do it. And that's what's so important about doing it. And people ask me, they're like, well, I don't know what video or what application to create. I don't know how to practice, because, do you have a list of applications to build to practice? And the answer is that's too far down the road. Don't create a real application. Just practice what you learned. Start by doing what I did in the video and recreating it, and then just tweak it a little bit and try and do it without watching the video again. Start with the idea in mind and go to the solution. Build that solution out. If we're talking about an if statement, then do 2 or 3 applications where you try out if and else if, and the if else statement, and ands inside the if, and ors, and all this fun stuff, okay? Try it all out. And the application does not have to make sense. It just has to do whatever thing you just learned. Because once you do that, what you're gonna find is you miss something. This happens to me all the time. And that's why I'm so big on practice. So I watched the .NET Conf 2020. And there was a video I watched there. I'm like, wow, that right there, I want to learn how to do that. Or I want to do that and show that off to my audience. And so it was hot reload in Blazor. And I'm like, this is awesome. I really want to try this. And I did, and it didn't work. And I'm like, but I saw it work. I knew how they did it, and it didn't work the way they showed. And I'm like, what did I miss? Well, I missed one critical step of what they were doing. I assumed I knew. And so by doing that practice, I revealed that assumption and was able to correct that assumption and actually learn the topic and learn how to do it right. By practicing, you take away all of your assumptions and you actually learn how to do things. So it's really important that you practice. Okay, so that's the first part, is to set up that path, point yourself in the right direction, identify the steps to take, and practice everything you learn. Every time you take a step, practice it over and over again. I know it feels like you're not making as much progress, but trust me, that gives you the experience that you need to be confident in what you have learned, not just say, oh, I've watched 30 videos. Don't care. It's what you can do that matters. And that's where that practice comes in. All right. So now the 4 important topics to know in 2021. I'm sure you want to know, hey, what's most important for me as a C# developer? And this is going to be relative, okay? Because for you, it might be something totally different. But in general, we're going to talk about the 4 important topics to know in 2021. And the first one, you're going to roll your eyes at probably, and that's okay. I want you to think about it. The first one, C#. You may say, well, Tim, we're on a C# channel. Of course you're going to say C#. That's so generic. It's not generic. And that's the thing I keep telling people. People come to me and say, I want to learn C#, so I'm going to learn ASP.NET Core. No, that's not where you start. You learn C#. And they say, well, okay, you show me how to do this MVC project, but I need to know how to do data access with it, CRUD operations with it. No, if you learned CRUD operations in C#, it wouldn't matter what user interface, whether it's WinForms, WPF, ASP.NET Core, API, doesn't matter. That data access will be the same. So if you learn C# and not focus on the user interface or a shiny little bit of C#, if you focus on learning C#, that's where you're going to see the most return on your investment. The more you spend time in C#, the deeper you learn it, the more you go into things like the solid principles and learn how events work and learn how to do object-oriented programming well. The more you know that, the more capable you will be in ASP.NET Core or .NET 5 or web projects or WinForm projects or whatever project it is. You'll be a lot more capable if you know C# well. So that's number 1, is to learn C# well. Number 2, and this feels a little obvious, but at the same time, it's time to learn about the web if you haven't already. And this doesn't mean HTML, CSS, JavaScript, tons of stuff. Not really. It means HTML and CSS to an extent. Yes, for sure. If you don't know HTML and CSS, at least at a fundamental level, you should. And this year, I'll be focusing on bringing out courses that will teach you HTML and CSS and a little JavaScript too, but I'm not talking about frameworks like Angular, React, or Vue. I'm talking about basic web stuff. And then ASP.NET Core, okay? If you focus on that, because ASP.NET Core, I'm not sure if you're familiar or not, but that covers API, Razor Pages, MVC, Blazor Server, and Blazor WebAssembly, all 5 project types. Learn those because that's going to give you the next biggest bang for your buck as a C# developer. Learn the web part of it, which really, once you know C# well, it's just using what you've learned in C# in a new and interesting way. It's not really revolutionary stuff for the most part. So learn that web. Now, the next one is Docker. And some people really push back on Docker. They don't want to learn Docker, but I tell you what, Docker is the tool to know as a developer. It will make you faster as a developer. It will make you more efficient, and it will help you when you go into a business environment. If you don't have to know Docker super in depth, but if you know how to use Docker, how to create a container, how to start a container, what containers are and why it's important, that's going to be really important, because I have a video on this channel where I talk about taking your production SQL database, making a backup copy of it, and creating a developer database with the data scrubbed out of it in Docker that you can give to your developers or give yourself every day automatically. Well, that right there is huge, to have a developer SQL server that's ready to test, ready to work with every single day, that's tested your restore of your backups for your SQL server, that has given your developers the latest and greatest stuff from production that's not secure, so that they can test out any bugs that they've found locally without having to test in production. It's just a win-win-win. We talked about Redis. And within about 30 seconds, I had a Redis server up and running and was operate against it because I use Docker. So just having that, instead of installing it on my machine and configuring ports and all this other stuff, I ran one command and I had Redis up and running on my machine to test against, so that when I deploy my application to the cloud, I can point it at a real Redis server and have it run right away. That makes me more efficient. So Docker is important. It's also important because it's the foundation for microservices. Most microservices operate in Docker containers, but it's not just microservices. There's the concept now of deploying websites as Docker containers, standalone, not connected to tons of other containers. But that way you can easily create multiple of these containers and scale your application without a lot of work. So Docker is kind of a big deal. It's the foundation for Kubernetes. Now you may have heard that Kubernetes has stopped using Docker. Yes and no. It still uses the same thing that you create your Docker containers with. It just uses it in a new way. So you don't have to change much. It's more conceptual than it is actually different. So don't worry, if you learn Docker, you're not going to get into a problem with Kubernetes. So 4 important topics to learn. First 3 are CSharp, the web, and Docker. And the 4th one is Azure. Azure is Microsoft's cloud offering. And here's why this is important. Some people say, well, Azure's not all free. It shouldn't be. I mean, they're a business. You're not going to get free hosting in most places. And if you do, it's horrible. And Azure gives you some low-end hosting as well for free. But the reason Azure is important is because it's economy of scale. When I worked as an IT director for a university, at that point it was a college, but it became a university. When I worked as an IT director, I had to install, set up, and configure and run servers. And we had about, maybe 20 servers installed in our server room. And anytime I had to replace a server, that was $3,500 to $10,000. And anytime there's any maintenance to be done, that was on my team. And anytime we had to get more hard drive space, my team. And all that work, security, my team. Air conditioning, my team. So it's very expensive to run on-premises servers. Azure makes that a whole lot easier because of the fact that it's economy of scale. The fact that they're doing it for hundreds of thousands of businesses. I don't want to compare it to Walmart because Walmart might be a bad analogy here, but it's how Walmart can charge less for something and still make a profit compared to your mom and pop store. There's economy of scale here. So Azure has higher levels of security than you will get on your premises. Trust me, it's better security than you will get in your company. They have better redundancies. They have multiple internet sources in every facility, and they have multiple power lines, and they have backup generators, and they have cooling systems. They have all these things dedicated to making sure that the cloud works well. And at the same time, you can get a website hosted for pennies a year. Or you can get, for example, Azure Functions. You can get 1 million operations per month for free. There's so many things you can get in Azure that you just can't get at the same price point on premises. And so businesses are continuing to outsource more and more stuff as they feel more comfortable with the web, as they feel more comfortable with what it can do for them, and what those costs really are. Because it can be deceptive. If you own your own server, you may think, well, it's free now, right? But you have to have someone to maintain it. What's their salary worth? And you have to replace it after 3 or 4 years. What's that worth? And you have to install patches. How much time does that take? And so on. And so as companies look at this and really look at the costs, they go, we can save money and do more. We can scale globally. And so Azure is becoming more and more and more critical to business. And so knowing Azure, knowing how to interact with it and how to make the best use of it, when to use Azure, when not to use Azure, what systems give you the best bang for your buck. The idea that you can put a website in a number of different Azure services and have it run, but knowing which ones are better than others for different circumstances. There's a lot of things you can do with Azure, and it's important to learn Azure. So I would encourage you this year, focus on learning Azure. So CSharp, the web, Docker, and Azure. Those four things will be really important to know in 2021. They will help grow you as a developer, and they will prepare you well for the job market, the broad job market. Now, there's things that I've not covered here. For example, desktop. Some people say, well, desktop is dead. It's not dead. In fact, it's alive and well. It's just that it's not flashy and it's not been broadly advertised because it's typically larger businesses who haven't moved off of desktop. And so they're continuing to grow and continue to change and evolve their desktop applications. Plus, they're adding new desktop applications because there are certain things that desktop works much better for than the web. For example, I've got a number of applications on my computer that are installed on my computer. If the web was just better, why would I have any application installed locally? Yes, I can get Microsoft Word online. I still use the installed version. It's just more performant, has more features. It's more easy to use. I don't have to worry about the internet being up and so on. Desktop is still a viable topic. So even though I don't necessarily mention your specific area of focus or desire, that doesn't mean it's not viable. It just means that in general, broad strokes, the most important things to learn, yours might not be in there. You can still absolutely make a great living in other things outside that. So those are the four most important topics to know in 2021. Let's talk now about the four topics to be cautious of. And I'll be very clear here. I am not saying fully avoid these topics, never do these topics, because I might even do a video or two or even a course or two in some of these topics in 2021. So I'm not saying totally avoid, but be cautious, because these are the four biggest, in my opinion, the four biggest tripping points to your success. These are the things that most often derail a well-intentioned learner from succeeding in their learning. Okay, so there's four things. The first one is machine learning. This is a topic that's really cool. Okay, machine learning is the idea that you can pump enough information into a computer that it can churn through, you can tell it how to churn through it, and it can come to conclusions based upon what it sees. And there's some really cool applications for this. And if you are a math whiz and love, those kind of things, that might be the area for you. But I tell you what, the casual person needs to avoid diving into machine learning, because while it's really cool, how's it going to benefit you? Unless you are a master's degree or PhD in math and want to use machine learning at your job, and that's your focus, unless you're one of those people, you probably aren't going to get a job doing this. An amateur machine learning person isn't a whole lot of benefit, because you need to know how to verify that the machine is giving the right answers. And that takes a lot of work. And so getting yourself distracted by machine learning, while you're going to see some cool demos, you're going to learn some cool stuff, it's not going to help you in your real life, in your job, in most cases. So I would be careful not to get distracted by that. Number two, This is what I see a lot. And I know I'm a little cringing saying it, but JavaScript front ends, Angular, React, Vue, don't get distracted, okay? Yes, these are great front ends. Yes, you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. If you are learning C#, it's not the right time to learn these JavaScript front ends as well. If you say, well, Tim, I'm going to focus on the web this year, so therefore I have to know these things. No, you don't. Okay? You need to learn the web first. Learn HTML and CSS first. Learn ASP.NET Core first. Then, once you are highly competent in those areas, then look to see, will Angular, Vue, or React help me continue my goals? Make that another step, not part of the same step. I think you're going to find that more and more those frameworks might not be as important as you thought they were. Not because they're not great frameworks, but because it's a totally different field. Those frameworks move very, very, very fast. And so keeping up with them and being more than just competent, but being very competent or being, in depth, at least a mid-level developer with those topics takes learning continually. That means you can't be learning C# as well. You just don't have the time. Or all you're doing is learning and not actually doing. Remember, practice is highly important. So therefore, you really don't have time. So pick one. If you're going to focus and dive deep into JavaScript, cool, go for it. But don't trick yourself into thinking you're also going to dive deep into learning C#. You have to sacrifice one to learn the other one better. If you try and do both, you will do them both poorly. So pick one, go deep, and then move over to the other. But just know that while you move over to the other one, you're going to start atrophying the first one. So that's going to take some balance there. So be very careful. Again, I'm not saying don't learn them. I'm saying be careful to have your eyes wide open before you start learning them. Number 3, Xamarin. And I wish I didn't have to say this, but this is probably not the year to learn Xamarin. It's not because it's not a great framework. It is. It's not because you shouldn't do mobile. You can. But there's a lot of changes coming in Xamarin in .NET 6. And so we don't yet know how that's going to affect Xamarin. In fact, we don't know if it's going to be the same or it's going to be a big learning curve change. We just don't know because it's not here yet. And some people say, well, .NET 6, I've already tried out. No, you haven't. You may have tried some really early preview bits, but what we're going to do in, say, August timeframe of 2021 is not what you're doing now in .NET 6, because they're still trying to figure out what all .NET 6 is going to do. So be very careful with that. If you don't have to learn mobile development right now, maybe wait until 2022, okay? Because at that point, we'll know more and we'll know more how to successfully create apps that work across Mac, Linux, and Windows, as well as iOS and Android and other platforms. So just know that might not be the best place to learn this year. If you want to be a mobile developer, that doesn't mean you have to wait a year though. What you can do, this goes back to things that are important this year, learn C# well, because Xamarin is C#. That's the engine that powers it. That's the code that is the code is C#. Yes, there's some UI stuff with XAML and yeah, you'll have to learn some of that. But if you know C# really well, and if you focus on that for this next year, first of all, you're much more likely to get a job or be able to be employable as a C# developer, even if it's not a mobile developer. You're more likely to be employable at the end of the year if you know C# well. But also, you'll be much better prepared to be a mobile developer with Xamarin in 2022 because you've already covered the C# stuff. And so when C# stuff comes up, like it will in every single demo, then you'll know how that part works. You'll have a much better understanding of what's going on in the C# side, so you're only learning the XAML side. So that's number 3. Number 1, machine learning. Number 2, JavaScript front ends. Number 3, Xamarin. And the last technology to be cautious of in learning is Kubernetes. And microservices, I know they're a big topic. In fact, we'll be doing at least 1, possibly 2 courses this year on microservices and how to implement microservices. And we might even dive into a little bit of Kubernetes. Kubernetes, if you're not familiar, is the system for taking your different microservice components and wiring them all up and allowing them to communicate with each other and talk to each other and scaling them out and all the rest. It's a very, very complex system. It's essentially taking everything we've learned about networking and storage and all the rest, making it virtual and putting it in a text file. It's complicated. And there's a lot of stuff that goes around Kubernetes and all the different technologies that support it and help it that are changing. And so I encourage you, don't start there. Not unless you've got a firm grasp on C#, not unless you got a firm grasp on Docker, not unless you have a firm grasp on web development, and then start to learn, but not until you have a firm grasp on all those other things first. All right. So that's my last topic to be cautious of this year. When people get tripped up, these are usually the 4 things that are tripping them up. Because what happens is this distracts them from their goal. They want to be a C# developer. And so they're saying, oh, I want to be a mobile developer. So Xamarin. Or I'm a web developer. So I'm going to learn React. Don't get distracted. These are shiny objects and they're very shiny. They're a lot of fun and they're really cool to learn. Don't get distracted. The more you can focus, the more you can stay the course and focus on your end goal, the faster you will move towards it. So focus on that end goal, which means you have to know that end goal. You have to know the steps. Okay. Kind of talked about that already. So those are the things you need to do. Those are the things you need to avoid. Now, in order to make 2021 count, first of all, identify that goal. All right. We've talked about that. Figure out what your goal is. And remember, your goal is not the end of your life. Biggest goal possible. I want to be, whoever. I want to be whatever at the end of my life. This is just this next big goal, whether it's this year or the next 6 months, next 3 months. Identify what that big goal is. And then figure out your steps. Figure out what steps you have to take. Don't get discouraged if you have to put more steps in as you go. As you figure out, man, I actually need to learn these 2 things before I can get to that step. That's okay. It's part of the process. It does help to have that guide, and you can definitely use my Foundation C# course series, those lessons. You can use those lessons as basically a free guide if you want. I am totally fine. I'm thrilled if you would do that. Now, if you decide you want to pay money instead of time, you can go ahead and buy it for sure. But if you just want to use the lesson order and take those lessons as your guide, that will make your steps easier. So identify your goal, order your steps. Don't get distracted by those shiny things. And finally, I want you to practice. Practice is so important. If you do nothing else this year, even if you got distracted, if you do nothing else but practice what you learn, you'll be much farther ahead than you were at the start of 2021. Let's make 2021 a great year. Let's make it the year where you go from okay to awesome at development. Let's make this the year where you gain the confidence that you really should have in your development. All right. I can't wait to see what you do. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of this channel in 2020. Thanks for sticking with it through the mess that was 2020. Let's make 2021 a much better year.